Watch This Week in Missouri Politics, Sunday mornings at 11 on ABC 30.
Politics. It's now time for our Opinion Maker panel. This week, we're joined by former State Representative Vicki Englund in South St. Louis County, current State Representative Robert Cornejo in St. Charles County, the Minority Leader of the State Senate, and what some would call the most powerful Democrat in state government, Senator Joe Keavney from right here in St. Louis, and we have the Chief of Staff to Senator Ryan Silvey, Aaron Williard. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Aaron, let's start with you. The State of the State was this week. You were there in attendance. What did you think?
Well, you know, I mean, I think that really it was the governor had to talk about Ferguson, and he did. And he spent a lot of time about it. But what I thought was really interesting is his emphasis on the bipartisanship. And, you know, this is a governor that has really been looked at as, you know, sometimes the Democrats in his party are upset with him, the Republicans are upset with him. But he's really in a position now where, you know, he's moving on to kind of the next phase. What's his legacy going to be? And I think he actually does have an opportunity to really make the most of trying to work with members from both sides.
Senator, the things the governor wanted to get done or did not want to see happen for the state, with the Republican supermajorities, it'll be up to you to choose what fights you engage in. What did you take from the speech?
Again, the bipartisanship was huge. In my own opinion, if we can't get everybody on the same page on some of these major issues, we're wasting our time. We need to push this legislation forward.
Did you find areas that you feel like you could join with your counterparts across the aisle? Oh,
sure. I mean, the issue with the transportation, everybody realizes we need to work on transportation. We need to do something with Highway 70. How we're going to get there, that's what we need to discuss. Sure. So it's going to be compromises on both sides.
Representative Englund, you are one that's known for bipartisanship. Some rumored you may take that bipartisanship to the attempt to the state Senate in 2016. When you heard the speech, did you hear things that you could identify with as well?
I did, but to tell you the truth, I've heard a lot of that before. And I think what the voters of Missouri are really looking for is, yes, let's talk about collaboration, let's talk about bipartisanship, let's talk about it, but the next step is actually doing it. You know, I think there have been a lot of missed opportunities over the last couple of years legislatively to actually make that happen. I think the opportunities have been there. So I'm really curious and excited to see what kinds of opportunities are going to show themselves this time.
Representative Cornejo, the one thing that was mentioned the most, I felt like, was the fact the governor acknowledged the fact that he doesn't come to the third floor that often, and he's going to do it more. When the governor comes to your office, what is that conversation going to be like?
Oh, well, obviously I'll welcome into my office and kind of just sit down and hash through the issues. One of the things in the State of the State address, it seemed like there was a lot of fluff but not a whole lot of substance. You know, for example, you know, he wanted to talk about ethics reform. I have an ethics bill out there also, but he just basically said, I want ethics reform, and didn't really dive into the details a whole lot. When it comes to my office, it's time to dive into the details and crank out some substantive things.
There was one thing I remember from a State of the State just a couple of years ago where he said he wanted limits, and if the legislature didn't put campaign contribution limits in, he'd go to the people. I didn't hear much talk about that. I haven't seen much about that. Was that a non-starter in the legislature, and or is it, do you take it as fluff because nothing's happened on it?
Yeah, you know, that's interesting because there's several different ethics proposals, ethics reform bills out there. Some that do include that campaign contribution limits, some that don't. Some are more focused on the revolving door from going from a legislator to a lobbyist. That's kind of where more of my focus is at. So it's going to be interesting to see how the bills progress through the process, and that will kind of give an indication as far as what can actually gain some traction and get across the finish line.
Senator, as the leader of your party in the Senate, what do you think about the governor being more engaged? Is it going to be helpful?
I think it will be. You know, this is my 6th session. And the governor has not spent much time on the third floor. I was elected minority leader the first week in November, and I've been down in his office 3 times already. So he is more engaged.
So there's some substance behind the speech, you think?
There is substance behind the speech, and quite frankly, I look forward for him coming to my office instead of me having to go to his.
Do you think that sometimes Jay Nixon is a little underrated? When he engages on issues and when he's in the room, he definitely is pretty persuasive. Now, being the governor helps, but I think sometimes people underrate his ability when he does engage and how effective he can be.
He can be very effective. He can make a very good argument. He doesn't speak a lot until he knows his position, sure. And I don't fault him for that at all.
Representative, are there some bills that you've worked on previously that you thought the governor's input and help could have helped you with?
I think so. I mean, I know there are a lot of education issues that I have near and dear to my heart, being on my local school board as well. You know, that was one of the missed opportunities that I think I mentioned earlier. You know, we had a lot of pieces of that legislation. We had a lot of things that we really could have come to an agreement on. I think we put the best piece of legislation forward we could. In the end, it didn't work out, and I'm looking forward to seeing those issues and the problems haven't gone away. We still need the legislation in order to fix those problems so that kids all across the state get a good quality education.
Aaron Williard, Senator Silvey is known as handling a very controversial piece of legislation in Medicaid reform. Having the governor involved, is it going to be helpful? Is there a time for him? How does that enter into your calculations?
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, we'll just ultimately see. You know, I think as Senator Keavney pointed out, you know, when the governor engages on certain issues, sometimes he can be compelling. And so I think that really, you know, what we have to realize, because most of the healthcare debate in the state has taken, you know, and really focused on Medicaid expansion. But there are so many other issues, you know, that also feed into healthcare and healthcare reform, and those are issues that are incredibly important. And I think that that's what we really need, you know, to look at, and we're going to have to focus on. And you know, personally, I know the last several years, jobs in the economy have been really important to a number of people. But as the economy starts to improve, I think we're going to start seeing things like education and healthcare come to the top of mind of most Missourians. And when that happens, healthcare and what ultimately we do with the reform in the state of Missouri is going to be ever more important.
You had a much talked about bill your office had earlier in the week where you offered expanding some forms of Medicaid to veterans. Is that something you've talked about with the governor's office? Does he have a position on that, or? No,
we haven't, and ultimately, you know, it was because we know, you know, some of the resistance that we faced, that Senator faced last session. You know, I think that some of the feeling was that maybe the proposal was too broad, that maybe it was too big, and so I think that this was an opportunity to kind of take, you know, instead of maybe try to get the whole pie, just take a bite and take a little bit more of a measured approach and really focus in on something that also, you know, we feel is important just for veterans.
Senator, you'll be the one that'll hear this bill first. What was your initial thought of that, kind of more of a piecemeal approach?
I think it's a great idea. For the last 3 years, we've tried to go for the whole thing, and we haven't been able to get much accomplished. I think if we can nibble away on the edges, we'll make serious progress, and hopefully we'll address the most dire needs earlier and pick up the slack later on.
We were just joined by Senator Nadal. Representative Englund, what was your takeaway from her interview, and did you learn some things about her view of some of the protesting and how to make that effective?
Well, I was very glad to hear that she sees that there are some steps being made toward progress. She talked a lot about education. She talked a lot about things that aren't necessarily easy things to talk about. And I think in the wake of the Ferguson scenario and the way everything played out, I'm really glad to see that there are some concrete solutions that are being put on the table, and that Senator Nadal sees that as well. I think that's very encouraging.
Representative Cornejo, you are a North County guy. You were born and raised there and now live in St. Charles County. Some of the issues that the governor discussed and that the senator discussed earlier in our previous segment, what are some of those things you could support that might be fixes and work across the aisle with them?
Yeah, last week I was announced as chairman of the Civil and Criminal Proceedings, so I'm going to get a lot of those municipal court reform bills and come through my committee, and it's going to be very interesting to see what we're able to do. I know Senator Schmidt filed a bill kind of lowering what the threshold of as far as how much municipalities can generate off of traffic tickets and basically shutting down speed traps. So it'll be interesting to see as far as moving forward. You know, I'm kind of focused more on the enforcement side of that reform versus what that actual threshold number would be. And so you know, I think we're going to be able to get some things done as far as municipal court reform.
Do you think your committee can pass out a piece of legislation that puts a cap at 10% or whatever on these fines? And do you feel it's taxation by citation when it's just kind of harassing tickets in certain towns?
Correct. Yeah. You know, I've practiced court all throughout the St. Louis metro area. I drive all over the area, and I've been known to have a heavy foot. So I definitely know the feeling when it seems like every time you pass a certain point on the highway, that there's always a cop sitting there, and you know, and there's a whole gang of them there, you know, pulling a whole group of people over, and it just looks like it's, you know, taxation by citation.
Aaron Williard, you've been well known as a person that's fought for tax cuts and actually worked in producing them. Do you think this is a way to basically backdoor tax people kind of by just harassing them and bugging them?
Well, I think what is really actually that I thought was informative, kind of from that I took out of the interview with Senator Chappelle Nadell, was that I think there are going to be issues that are directly related to Ferguson, and then there are going to be these corollary issues. And I think that, you know, what I hope is that, you know, that there's actually some progress, that there is a plan on what we can actually do to address some of the issues related to Ferguson. Because I think that, you know, some of the issues, you know, as the senator pointed out, because of, you know, municipal court reform is not why Michael Brown was shot or why the incident occurred. And so I think that, you know, that really, I mean, from my perspective, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the governor, if he's going to step up, and what the plan is actually going to be on addressing issues related to Ferguson and what happened there, and issues that are kind of corollary issues. So, you know, I don't know ultimately how taxes may get pulled into that. I would be a little leery of trying to take any issue and try to interject it into something as sensitive as Ferguson. But, you know, I mean, the legislature is a crazy place, and you know, there's always compromise met on all sorts of issues.
I don't think anybody's going to take the opposite side to that. But Senator, is a bill to hamper and restrict these speed traps going to make it through the Senate?
Well, I believe it will. I think it'll come out of committee. I think Senator Schmidt's bill will come out of committee in the very near future, and we'll get it to the floor.
Were you perplexed that this is not just an urban problem? There were rural senators, some even wanting to continue speed traps, that was discussed when the bill was being debated in committee. This is not just a St. Louis issue. This is an issue that kind of harasses Missourians all across the state.
Well, actually, the underlying statute came from Max Creek. So, yeah, this originated outstate. Now, as a result of some of the court reforms, we're drawn into St. Louis County to address some of this. We need to address it because I don't think it's a good idea to fund government by citation or by arrest warrants. But the flip side of that is, you know, we need to figure out some way either to consolidate these things or to consolidate the courts or to fund them, a different source of funding. We can't just take the revenue and not do anything.
Senator, there was an issue you rose last week with the death penalty that got a lot of people talking. Can you explain to our viewers that might have missed some of that debate exactly what you're trying to do?
It's really very simple. What I'm trying to do is have the state auditor do a one-time study to determine how much it costs for Missouri to use the death penalty versus life without parole versus life with parole. 3 different parameters. I think other states have done it. It's astounding how much it is to instill the death penalty. I want to see how much it is for Missouri, and then we can have the discussion whether we want to have the death penalty or not.
In those other states, do you know what some of the outcomes have been of those audits?
I think the state of Maryland, it cost them, they did a 10-year study, it cost them $170 million. They executed 5 people.
Well, Representative Cornejo, do you think there's a problem with obtaining that information?
No, absolutely not. You know, I think knowledge is power, so the more information we have, the better discussion we can have in the long run.
Sure. Representative Englund, is that the kind of thing that you could see being supported?
I think so, and I think we have to also remember that these types of studies are very critical in the era that we have with term limits right now. I mean, every elected official in the Missouri House and the Missouri Senate will only be there for a certain number of years. And so when we're looking at these studies, that data is longitudinal. It looks into a much longer time period, and then that data is there regardless of the players that are there to enact the legislation.
Representative Cornejo, the one thing we didn't hear in the State of the State, like we did in the State of the Union, was a request for tax increases. I assume that was just a non-starter, right?
I think that's a very safe bet that there will not be increased
taxes. Is there a chance that there could be a tax cut this session?
I think a lot of us maybe want to see how the first tax cut goes and kind of take a measured approach as far as to see what the full effect is before we decide whether we need to go further.
Aaron Willard, is there a tax cut possible this session?
Well, I think that, you know, anything again.
You're a qualified man that would know how to do it.
You know, anything again is possible. I think that, you know, kind of going, especially with tax policy. I mean, the state of Missouri, there's just so many different tax brackets. It's so antiquated. They attempted to try to address that last time. I think that if there's room for, you know, maneuvering, it's going to be around the edges.
Awesome. It's time for plugs. Let's do our plugs. Representative Englund.
Sure. I would say one of the best things that people can do is take a look at their local public schools website.
Local public schools. Representative Cornejo.
Touching on veterans, I'd encourage everybody to go to the Wounded Warrior Project.
Nice. Joe Keavney.
Get involved in local government, get out and vote. We only have about a 15% turnout. We need to improve that.
And Williard.
This week we filed with a bipartisan group a civics education initiative.
Excellent. And we have a big announcement ourselves. Starting the second Sunday in February, we'll be on in Southeast Missouri on KBSI, Channel 23. So catch us there. Continue to catch us here on ABC 30 or at thisweekinmissouripolitics.com. We'll see you next week.